As a student leader, there are lots of times where you'll be faced with difficult conversations that you have to undertake. This course is specifically designed to provide you with some tools and tips and tricks that you can use in order to engage in more successful conversations, more successful, difficult conversations. So a little bit about me. My name's Ian Cruikshank. I'm a Canadian student affairs professional. I've been working in student affairs for the last 10 years at 3 different universities. I'm a certified mediator. I'm also the father of twin boys, who you can see in that picture there, and I'm a recreational athlete of sorts. In my work in student affairs, I've worked with many student leaders in areas of conflict resolution and coaching them on how to have conversations with other members of their organizations that would be difficult to have and oftentimes challenging to have. So this quote, I think, is quite relevant to the topic at hand. The single most important thing that you can do is to shift your internal stance from "I understand" to "help me understand." Everything else follows from that, and that was said by Douglas Stone, and I think it's quite relevant to what we're going to be talking about in this course. The agenda for the course: what is a difficult conversation, why it is important to have them, and then there are 3 steps to success that we'll address in topics 2, 3, and 4. And then other tips and group exercises will be addressed in topic 5. And the group exercises are designed so that you can take them back to your organization or back to your colleagues and engage them in a dialogue around how having more successful conversations. The quote at the bottom, "It was difficult to get a conversation going. Everybody was talking too much," by Yogi Berra, I also think is quite relevant to this topic, as often what we find is that we're in difficult conversations, we're so interested in getting our own points across that we quite often forget to listen to what the other person is saying. So through this session, through this course rather, you'll have the opportunity to learn and reflect on what makes a conversation difficult, explore and make meaning of the 3 steps towards having a difficult conversation or a successful one. Reflect on your own approach to difficult conversations, develop your own personal approach to dealing with those conversations. There will be short quizzes at the end of each topic. The answers will be multiple choice, true and false, and then one word responses. So the agenda for topic 1, which is what we're going to address currently, is what is a difficult conversation, why is it important, and then examples of difficult conversations themselves. So what factors do you think play into making a conversation awkward or difficult? Jot them down on a piece of paper, and I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. So here are sort of the top 5 that come to mind quite quickly. The first one being probably the most often that I've come across anyway, and that they don't necessarily occur mutually exclusively. They can occur in combination. So emotions and feelings are often the underlying tone to a difficult conversation. Usually that's because there's a fair amount of anxiety with regards to a difficult conversation that one knows that they're going to have to undertake or engage in. There's also a question of hurting feelings and the emotions attached to the topic specific that are going to be covered within the conversation. And so it's important that we learn how to move past those emotions and feelings and really address the issues. Relationships. For student leaders, this is often a challenge because many of the folks that you're working with are peers that you may have had a friend relationship with before, or you may have been working with as direct colleagues, and you've been elevated into a more senior leadership position, and now you're having to address issues of job performance or issues concerning their ability to function within the organization or the group, or other issues just in general. And because of that pre-existing relationship, it challenges your ability to engage in a conversation that really gets down to the heart of the matter, while leaves your relationship intact. And so we'll talk a bit about that. The power dynamic is something that you have to be aware of in every organization. With student leaders, it's an interesting dynamic because people are coming from all over the world, and so you also not only have to be aware of the power dynamic within your organization, but you also need to be aware of power dynamics that exist within society. And that can be challenging when you're dealing with people from all kinds of different backgrounds, from all kinds of different cultures, and with all kinds of different expectations. The content of the conversation can in itself be difficult. And so what we'll talk about is how to address conversations in a way that is sincere and sensitive, so as not to embarrass somebody, but also so that you get your point across and it's direct enough that you'll get results. And then the last one that we cover here is setting, and that can be sort of time and place, right? Is it that this all sort of comes to a head in a very public setting where a conversation isn't an appropriate place for it to happen, and so then you have to leave that conversation for a bit, or is it occurring in a private place where you can actually engage in the conversation right now? And either one of those can make for some anxiety and make the conversation feel possibly more difficult than it is, but certainly will make the conversation difficult. So why are these conversations important? Why is it important to address challenging issues within your group? So I think it's important for you to ask some pretty good questions to yourself. So the first sort of thing is, are you okay with sort of the status quo or the same old song and dance? Or are you interested in change? And it's natural for people to feel that they might upset the other person and sort of feel that they need to avoid that situation where you're going to upset somebody. But you need to think about whether or not you're helping them improve. Who will benefit from the conversation? I think it's important for you to take stock in trying to find as balanced an approach as possible and coming up with a list of who is actually going to benefit from the conversation. You want it to be as balanced as possible. If it's just you that's benefiting from this conversation, then I think you would need to ask some questions about whether or not the conversation is important to the organization and is important to the other person or people, or if you're sort of selfishly moving that agenda forward. Who are you protecting? By not acting, who are you protecting? Are you protecting your interests, or are you protecting their interests? And in the end, essentially, it's up to you to decide what will benefit you, your organization, and them. So a little bit more about why it's important. By their very nature, difficult conversations are challenging to get started, hence the name difficult. Quite often when faced with conflict, a natural response or a natural strategy is to avoid the conflict. This is natural for many people. It is often seen as a negative, but in many cases, or in some cases anyway, when you're taking stock of things and you realize that, hey, wait a second, that this conversation, if it takes place, or confronting this conflict is really going to benefit me, or is only really going to benefit the other person, then it might be worth it to really think about whether or not it's important to address the conflict, or whether or not you're able to just sort of let it go. Before you decide, obviously you have to come up or find a balance with the objectives of the conversation. So what's the issue? Is it, as I've mentioned, is it important to the organization? Is it important to you? Is it important to the other parties involved? What is the potential fall of doing nothing? So if I don't do anything, will this be something that lingers, or will it be something that sort of fades away, or is it something that will sort of grow over that period of time and will become more difficult over a longer period of time? What are the potential benefits, and then what are the potential side effects, or what do you see as being side effects? And often what we get into here is starting to think about what is the impact going to be on people outside of this conflict or outside of this situation. Is there going to be sort of any ramifications to those who are simply observers, or simply in some form related to the people that are involved? So some examples of difficult conversations that you'll face as student leaders: confronting unacceptable behavior within the group, providing honest feedback on poor performance. And for many student leaders, it's the first time that they'll be involved in doing this. It's an incredible skill to build. It's very important towards managing people in the future, but it can be, as I've mentioned earlier, very challenging to do when you're dealing with peers or possibly friends. Respectfully challenging the opinion, idea, approach of a colleague or peer can often be difficult. Sharing in a tough decision that you've had to make, again, as a leader, often you'll be called upon to make those tough decisions, and then at some point you'll have to address your organization or the people within your organization, knowing full well that not everybody's going to be on board with the decision that you've made. So how do you go about doing so in a way that's tactful and has the best chance for success? Discussing tough issues like hygiene or dress. These can be challenging, obviously, to deal with because they're very personal, and usually this conversation is loaded with emotion. So how do you have a conversation that, as I mentioned before, is sincere and sensitive, but is also direct enough that you know that your point taken and that a change is about to occur? Acknowledging a mistake that you have made can often be a very challenging thing to do within an organization, but it can also be a very powerful thing for the organization moving forward. And so how do you do that? And then the last one, which is very much related to the first, which is challenging a comment or action which is harmful or not inclusive. The reason that it's separated out is that I do think it is just that important, and it happens on a very regular basis, whether you're working with students who are direct involved in your organization, or they may just be people who are attending an event. Quite often you will overhear comments that can be harmful or in some way uninclusive of others, whether they be a group or an individual, and then how do you address those in the moment with other people, and doing so in a way that provides them with an opportunity for education. So the 3 steps for successful conversations: gaining clarity, move past avoidance, and then finally do it. In the next topic, we'll be talking about gaining clarity. So the first one. That's it for the introduction or introductory topic. Remember to fill out the quiz, and we'll move on to gaining clarity.